Okay, this video is very long because I really get into a lot of detail, so you might not want to just sit and watch it all in one sitting. You might want to skip through the chapters as you get to the certain steps. But I did try to make it engaging enough to just sit and watch and learn. It'll hopefully preemptively answer all the questions you may have as you get to each step in the process, and you might do your order a little bit different so you can skip around. There's sort of chapters of the video, and they're all linked here so you can skip right to the chapter for the step you're on where you might have questions. So, watch it on double speed or just reference this when you need it. Let's begin. I've been making guitars here on YouTube for a while, and one of the questions I get most often asked is, how do I get started making guitars? Especially from people that don't have some of the big fancy expensive tools I have. That's where I came up with this idea for this kit. So in here is a router template and literally every nut, bolt, screw, and string that you need to make a guitar. Everything except for the actual block of wood for the body. The idea being, with this plus the online content that you can watch and download, you will have all the information you need to go and make this guitar. And in the original build video that I made that goes with this, there's a short version on YouTube as well as the extended version for people that purchase the kits. I did it all with just basic hand tools. So I wanted to bring that sort of practicality to a bass guitar kit, and that's what I've done here. It's a little bit different than the guitar kit, but basically the same concept. And I haven't even made one yet, so I'm going to open this box up and make one for the first time for this video and see if my system works. And of course, before it goes to market, I will make any adjustments that I need after trying it out right here. Now, so the last time I went right down to hand tools. This time I'm going to use just basic woodworking tools. No CNCs or lasers, but I'm going to use a table saw and a bandsaw to speed things up a little bit. Just the types of things that are in basic woodworking shop. But if you don't have those, you can always watch the guitar video and see how to scale back away from those big tools and use, skill saws and other stuff as well. So first, let's start by opening up this box and seeing what's in it. Pick up. Basically what I was going for with this kit is I wanted the design that you would be able to make if you use everything in the kit and the plans that I give you to be just a very generic, traditional, like electric bass guitar. I don't want to say any brand names, but I don't ever want to copy someone else's body style, and I'm sure you don't either. So it's just like a very, basic looking but original and new bass guitar body style. Now, you don't have to make this body style. You can make whatever style you want. All of these parts in this kit will work with like any shape you can imagine for the most part, and I will show you in the course of the build. But so here's what's in the box, and I'll also tell you a little bit about what's available online. You're going to find all these little parts in little paper bags, and some of them have tape on them just to help you from losing them and whatnot. So let me go through it all. First off, there's this piece of paper which will give you directions on how to get to the website to get all the downloads and the content. You probably already have that. Set of strings. These are just a very basic traditional set of strings, and they're nothing fancy or expensive. I never really want to use good strings when I'm building an instrument because I find myself very often taking the strings off and on a few times in the process of setting it up. Once I have the instrument set up, then I'll put on some good strings. So I partly did that to keep the cost down, but also just because it just makes more sense to use an inexpensive set of strings during the process of building. And there's 4 screws and these trim washers for bolting the neck to the body. This is a string retainer that's going to go up here in the headstock to help keep downward pressure on the strings. Here's our 4 tuners with trim ring and 16 little screws to mount these on. This Allen key comes with the neck for making truss rod adjustments. We have a traditional Fender style bridge with the screws to hold it in and this little Allen key for making adjustments. These are our strap holders with a little gasket. We have our electronics components. We have a 1/4-inch jack. We have 2 potentiometers, also known as pots, and one of them says A250 and one says B250, and it's important to distinguish the difference. What you want to do is you want to use the A for the volume knob and the B for the tone knob. Not the end of the world if you mix them up, but that's what they're designed to do. And then there's also these 2 plastic knobs that you can use, or you can make your own, of course. Here's some wire and some solder for doing the wiring. Here is the heart and soul of the electronics, these custom New Perspectives Music pickups made by Gemini Pickups, and these are mounting screws for the pickup. Templates. There are 2 template boards that come with this. This one here is for laying out your neck pocket, your pickup, and locating your bridge. Notice the center line down it. And then this one here is for routing your cavities for your electronics, and this one here is for making your cavity cover. I wanted to make this base simple and all top routed. So this is all like part of the design to just cut it from the top. You don't have to do anything on the back. And then this is, of course, the most important part, the neck. When I made the guitar kits, I found a neck that I liked and I bought them in bulk direct from the factory, but I wasn't finding necks that I liked for the bass kit. Maybe I'm a snob because I'm a bass player by trade, but I ended up having these made to my specifications at a factory overseas, and I'm super excited about them. They are exactly what I wanted. This is a 34-inch scale Fender style bass neck. It's like a Fender jazz bass style neck is what you would call it, because it's a little bit skinnier here than a precision style bass, and I just kind of happen to like that a little bit. So this is for a 34-inch scale bass. It's all maple, which is a sustainable wood, no matter where in the world it's come from, and the headstock is partially shaped out and drilled out for you. So this is ready to get finished and put on just as is. You may end up having to make some minor fret adjustments, and we'll talk about that in the build and setup part of the video. But these necks are beautiful. I'm really impressed with the quality of them, and I will definitely be working with this factory again in the future. They did a great job. When you purchase the kit, you have some online access to an extended version of this video, as well as some downloads. And what I'm doing is, since I have the guitar kits already out there, I'm just putting all of that information together on the same page. So if you buy a bass kit, you have access to all the guitar kit download files and information and videos, and if you buy a guitar kit, you have access to all the bass downloads and information and whatnot. So in the downloads, there's a thing about wiring which you can look at or download. It just shows some very basic wiring schematics, and we'll discuss that in this build as well as there's some guitar bodies you can download, and then there is the bass body I designed for the kit right here, which can be downloaded and printed out on a piece of paper to make templates or to cut your body or whatever. So I'm going to make the body that I designed. You don't have to use this. You could use your own body design, but you could use this and my templates as reference. The other thing you can do with this design is as a PDF, and if you do have a CNC, you can open this PDF up into your CNC and then continue to make it from there. I'll go through all the measurements in the process of this build so you'll know them to input them into the CNC. But before I can do any of this, I have to get my body blank ready. So I'm going to take all of these parts that I just laid out, I'm going to pick them up and carefully put them in a box somewhere so I don't lose anything, and then get a body ready. Let's get started on making this body. First thing I need to do is select the right wood that I want to use, and I'm super excited for this build. I've been saving this piece of wood. If you don't know, I have a podcast called the Reclaimed Audio Podcast, and I host it with my two good friends, William Lutz and Phil Pinsky. We've been doing the show for about 5 years, and Phil lives in Canada and Bill lives in California. And in California, the mighty redwood grows. I don't get to see that around here in Connecticut. So Bill had this table that he had made years ago out of this piece of live edge redwood that, since he knew I was excited to try it, he sent to me, and I'm going to make this bass guitar out of it. The problem with this block of wood is it is too big and too thick. Right now it is about 2 3/4 inches thick. Now, like a standard sort of like Fender style guitar, they tend to be about 1 5/8 inches to 1 3/4 inches thick. I personally think that's a little too thick and too heavy. I tend to aim for more like 1.5 inches thick, sometimes even less. For this project, I'm going to aim for around 1.5 inches thick. So I don't think I want a plane a whole inch away from this block, because if I were to cut it to size, I could do that. It seems like a waste of wood. So instead, I'm going to cut this up so I can resaw it on my bandsaw and then glue it back together, and then I'll have some more wood for another project. So how big of a blank do I need? And here I have printed out the bass guitar. It's always a little tricky to line these up just right, but it doesn't have to be perfect because we do have physical templates to work off of. When you print things that are too big, you have to go into your printer settings and make sure it doesn't just reduce it to fit the page. And there are these little guides that you can use to sort of help you line stuff up. You got to be able to sort of see through the paper a little bit. It's not going to matter because we're going to use this to make our pockets, but obviously while I'm doing this, I want to do the best job I possibly can and try to get this as close to the design I have as possible. That looks pretty good. Now that I have it all set up, I'm going to make it a little bit rigid. I drew this outline around the whole project, which is 22 inches long by about 13 inches deep. So that's how big of a block we need to cut this body out, 13 by 22. So I need to turn some of this wood into a 13-inch by 22-inch blank that's about 1.5 inches thick, give or take. What I'm going to do is cut this into 3 about 5-inch strips that'll give me a little bit of room to work with, that I can then resaw on my bandsaw to make them a little bit thinner, and then glue them up into my blank. That seems like the most efficient way. Now what I would normally do is go over to my bandsaw where I have a pretty big resaw blade on and cut this through there, but I think what I'm going to do instead is cut it right on the table saw. I can put one edge down and cut most of the way through this and flip it over. So I'm running the blade up. It's a little more than half the height of the block of wood, so now I can flip it over and cut the other half like that. We want it to be 1.5 inches, so I'm going just a little bit under 1 3/4 inches. So, I mean, this is something I can totally use, whereas if I had just run this through the planer and left it whole, I would have planed all this wood away into sawdust, which would have been no good. Okay, this is right off the table saw. I didn't do any jointing or planing or anything, and I assembled the block of wood back the way it was, so the grain sort of lines up, and it still looks sort of like one piece. This knot is a little bit troublesome, but I just took my sort of base cut out here and I put it there, and I can see the knot all the way here, so I think we got plenty of wood to not have to worry about it. Just that way I can keep the grain all together. If I do this pretty quickly, you see this little gap here? If I do this pretty quickly, I think I can squeeze this all together without a problem and make it look like one block of wood again without jointing it and using some heavy clamps. This redwood is nice. It's a little bit harder than I expected because it is like a type of pine tree. I was afraid it was going to be really a little bit too soft, but I am a fan already of redwood. Since this is live edges on a slight angle and it wants to slide on me a little bit, so I need to clamp these ends to keep it still. Right there at that knot, things are a little squirrely because that's what knots do to wood, but I'm not going to use that part of the wood anyways, so I'm not going to worry about it, and I think that this is going to seam up just fine. I see squeeze out in all the important places here, which is where the base is going to get cut from. Okay, while that sits, let's make our template to cut our body, because I don't want to just put this on the wood and run the risk of messing up. I'm going to make an MDF template out of this first that I can then use on this wood to rough cut it in and use a router to get a nice clean line. I just dug up this piece of MDF cut off from some other templates that's 14 inches by 24 inches, so it's almost perfect for what I need. If you don't know this, with spray glue you always want to spray both surfaces that you plan to stick together and let the glue dry for a minute before you put them together, and that will give you a nice tacky bond. Let that sit for a minute. Let's dry it for a minute, so we'll stick this on. I give you the parts that come with the template, just in case they come in handy for anything. I don't see any point in throwing them away, but I can use this template and mark it up with this and see if everything looks good. So if I line my red lines that have my pocket up with this pocket, that looks
and get my center line there, I can kind of check this all out and see if it looks like it's going to work. And it looks like it's off a little bit, but it's going to be okay because, like I said, the important thing is going to be when I put this template on here to make everything work. So as long as I have a pretty good reference, I should be good to go. I'm going to draw those in. Close enough for rock and roll. So now I'm pretty confident that all of my math is going to work. I have a center line drawn. I need to cut out this template shape, and I'm going to do it on my bandsaw. I'm just going to follow the outside line of my bass guitar shape, cut this out. Again, you don't have to use my shape, you can use whatever shape you want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on the outside of the line a little bit and then sand it in so I don't make any mistakes. Okay, that looks pretty good. I need to just go around and clean these edges up because this is going to become a router template, and so I want this edge to be perfect so my final instrument is perfect. I'm just going to go right over here to my... Here's a little tip too when you're designing. Design to the tools that you have. Like, make whatever kind of pocket you have here fit a tool that you have. Otherwise you'll end up doing it by hand, which is no fun. Okay. That looks pretty good. I said this in the guitar video and I'll say it again. Make copies of these templates. This MDF is cheap, and before you do anything with this, I highly recommend just making new copies of them just in case you mess something up, because stuff happens, and if you do, you're gonna have to buy another template from me. But if you don't, and you just make copies of this right away, you have a backup somewhere. It's kind of like the seed bank for templates. So do that with every template you make. If you make a guitar body that you like, before you go messing it up and using it, make a template copy, make a copy of it. As I'm looking at this, I think I want to back up just a little bit from where I drew these black lines before and just push everything down just a skosh and just a tiny bit below this line. That's just what looks right to me. But I'm not actually going to route this stuff into this template. You can, and it makes a lot of sense to do that, but I'm going to do it differently using two different templates. But that's just the way I like to do it. The main reason I'm not going to is because it just makes this whole section easier. If I were to have this hole cut out, then I wouldn't have this line, so I'd have to make another template just for that. But I don't see the need to have a template shaped like the body that does these things. This template I created works just fine. That looks pretty good. I have this very nice little 1.5 inch thick block of redwood now to make my base. So let's take a look. Everything looks pretty good. I think I like the other side better for my top. So I want to sort of find the center of it, but I don't want to find the center of the entire blank. I actually want to find the center of the center board, which I can barely see the lines here because I got it pretty good. The reason I'm doing this is so my instrument will be centered to the center board instead of being centered to the block, just in case it's a little off. Connect the dots. Probably push it as far away from that knot as possible. I take my center line that I have drawn here, line it up with the line I just drew, and I can give me a quick rough outline. I'm going to use my template, line it up with those lines again about where I think looks good. And see, this is why it doesn't matter what's here, because I'm going to use this template, so this doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to go right about, by looking at the template I can see I have this, the back of the square is about 1.75 inches from the top corner. So I'll just sort of use that as a reference. So that's about where I had planned it before when I was looking at it. So I use my line that's on my template, I line it up with my pencil lines here, and now I'm going to draw these shapes in. This is all just for me to see it. So now I can visualize what my instrument will look like. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this, and I can use, see how I have this line kind of extends there and there? I can use that as well as this line. Again, none of this is super crucial right now, but that looks pretty good. I'm actually going to grab a marker. Nice. Yeah, that's a little easier for me to see. I'm not going to draw this because I'm not going to cut that, but I'm going to cut this pickup hole and this. So that looks pretty good. Okay, now we have something that looks pretty close to a guitar, and we're excited we can start cutting it out to make it look like a guitar. Now, of course, what you want to do right now is run right over to the bandsaw and start cutting out guitar shapes, but I would suggest doing that later. I like to work off the block like this as much as possible because it's still a solid flat block. There's no curves to worry about or any of that stuff, so I can do all my routing and all my template cutting right in this piece here. I am going to use this router template that came with your kit. I'm going to line it all up and clamp it down on this block. I got plenty of room to do that. I could even, you see I have these holes here, I could even run a couple screws in right here, or little brad nails into some of the waste material. These are all into the guitar, so you might not want to do that, but I can put a couple screws here to help hold it in place. I can do the two-sided tape thing, which is what I might do, or I can just use clamps, which I do sometimes, and I move them around as I go. And I'm going to route out my neck pocket, and I'm going to route out my pickup pocket. This is not to get routed out. This is just here for reference so you know where your bridge goes, but we don't want to cut that hole. The bridge is going to go right flat on the body like that, so don't forget that. Now, how deep do we need to make these holes? Good question. The neck is about 1.25 inches thick at the heel, which is pretty typical, and what I found I like to do is I like to make this pocket a little bit more than 5/8 of an inch deep. I go for 0.65 inches when I run the CNC file, and that works almost perfectly every time for necks that I make or necks like this that are factory made. Now the pickup is also about the same thickness as that 0.65. It's about 0.7 inches thick. I tend to make the hole probably too deep, and then I put stuff in it so it has room to float around because I'd rather be too deep than too shallow. I don't want to have it too shallow and have to go back and figure out how to make it deeper. So I'm going to make this pocket the same depth, 0.65 inches, just to keep things simple. I'm going to set up my drill press to use a Forstner bit and drill away a bunch of this material first, not getting too close to the edge, and then I'm going to use a router and the template to clean that all out. This is a piece of the cutoff from the guitar body blank I have, and what I'm going to do is use this, and it doesn't have to be a piece of that wood, it can be just about anything, but I'm going to find my 0.65 inch depth here on my tool, my thing, and just make a little line, right? So I can see that little line right there of that depth. I'm going to put this on my drill press and run this Forstner bit down until it reaches that line. I'm going to go just a little bit above that line, and then I have a little lock here so I can lock that into place, and then there's this little nut on my drill press that makes that as a stop. So yours may be different, but this way I can consistently drill to that depth without having to think. I'm going to drill these two pockets out. I'm not going to get anywhere near the line. I'm going to stay way away from it. The router is going to take care of that. I don't want to run any risk of this thing jumping and going into the wood that I want to save. So just very basic bolt cleaning. I'm just using a Forstner bit. I don't even know what size it is. You can use whatever size you want. Obviously the smaller you have, the closer you can get to the edge, but the bigger you have, the more you can clear away faster. This is just the first one I grabbed. It's kind of small, but whatever. Now I'm ready to use my first router template. And now there's several ways I could set this up. First off, we have all these marks and lines I made, so we want to line it up. Now I want to hold this template perfectly still while I use my router, and there's a couple ways I can do that. One is I can use two-sided tape, but I find that stuff to be a pain in the neck to mess with and clean up. So the other trick is to use masking tape and CA glue, and you put masking tape all over the body, and then you put it all over your template. You put some super glue, and then you squish it down, and then you've got that's all nice and done. The problem with that is I lose visibility for some of my lines. It makes it a little bit tricky to line up. Now here's what I like to do, which I think I'll be able to do with this blank, is I just use clamps. This clamp's a little short, so I have some of these call clamps that reach a little further. And as long as you have a couple clamps in some good spots that don't interfere with your router, you're good to go. So here, remember I mentioned I have these little pilot holes. I can actually just screw or whatever right into the wood, so I might do that down there. Now down here, I don't need to use this part of the template. I only need to go as far as here, and then plus my router base is going to overhang a little bit. So let me start by clamping here. It all looks pretty good. And this is another advantage to, you know, not having the instrument have its shape. If the instrument had its shape, it might be easier to get the clamps in some locations, but I also would not be able to have this excess material to screw right into on the ends here. Sometimes they sort of stick on the laser cutter, and I don't bother knocking them all out. I just send them to you. And I just have a couple little flathead 3/4 inch screws. Okay, that template is not going anywhere, and I didn't have to waste a bunch of super glue or make a big project out of it with double-sided tape. I'm going to use a pretty big router that has a pretty big base plate, but I can see here that I have plenty of room for my router to go everywhere it needs to go. Now remember, the overall depth we're going for here is 0.65 inches, and so that's about how deep the pockets are now off of my drill press. Let's check them and see. There should be a little bit less, actually. 0.58, 0.6. Perfect. So the reason I went just a little bit shallower is on my final pass I want to clean up all these little dots that are left from my Forstner bit. There's all these little spots here where you can see where the drill press pressed in where the Forstner bit was, so I want to go just a little bit deeper than this to clean all that up and make it look pretty, and that's why I only went down to about 0.6 instead of 0.65. Let's talk about router bits for a second and what you're going to use to do this. What you need is a pattern router bit, unless you have a collet system with like the little guide thing, but I don't like those. I like these better. So basically it's just a straight router bit that has a bearing on it that will roll along the edge of a template as a guide, so it can't cut beyond the template. See how that works? They sell these at the box store. The problem with these is they're very big and aggressive. So if you go and buy one of these, in order to use this template, you're going to be cutting deeper than you want to cut, which means you need to bring this template up by stacking and making an additional template, so putting some kind of riser blocks on it, so you're not cutting too much and too deep into the instrument. There are other options, of course. They do make them in multiple shapes and sizes. There are cheap ones and there are expensive ones. This is the one that I use. I strongly recommend. This is not an endorsed video. I buy these with my own money. But this is the router bit that I would suggest. It is 1/4 inch deep by 1/4 inch in diameter, super small with a little pattern on it. Since it's so small, you can just use this template as is, and you can do very small and tight corners and shapes with it. And since it's so small, you can't do too much at once, which is the last thing you want to do. You can see the bearing in there. Now what we need to do is set that up so it rides along the template. And this is one of the cutouts of the template, and this is one of the reasons I include them, because they come in handy for things like this. I can see just a little bit of my cutter sticking out past that, and just a little bit of the guide bearing on the block of wood. And so that's where I want to start. Just a little bit sticking out. So now it's really as simple as this. I drop this in the hole, and I follow along the edge. Clear the whole pocket out in case there's any little high points, and I'm going to go all the way down to the level that I've already drilled to, plus just about 5/100ths of an inch beyond to smooth out that bottom. It's going to take a few passes, so let's dig in. Let the router spin down before I move it to the next hole. I followed the edge and brought the pocket down just a little bit. I'm going to bring my router bit down a little more. So now I'm still on the template, but a little bit past. I have gotten quite a bit of this edge down, so I have enough now to set my template router bit up on here with the bearing on the wood instead of on the template, so I can actually remove this template to finish it off now. Now I can just follow the edge of the actual wood. Yeah, 2 more passes. So I brought the router bit up, so it's going to touch this but not quite go to the bottom, and then I'm going to do my final pass to clean up the whole bottom. I will set our final depth to 0.65. So I have it here on my digital caliper. So I'm going to transfer it to my regular little square here, lock it in place. Now I can set this on my base. There we go. And now when I set this down onto this wooden block, it should just rock and teeter a little bit. You can see how it's just not, see how it's just not quite sitting flat, because it's going to cut that 5/100ths of an inch out of there and do that whole bottom final pass. So you can see what it looks like now. It looks kind of rough. And now we're going to do this one last pass and it's going to clean it all up. And that looks beautiful. It's so satisfying, right? On your other template, you have a pickguard. This is actually a multi-purpose template, you'll see in a little bit, as well as this sort of crop circle looking pattern. And what I did is, this could be just about anything as long as it's hidden by the pickguard, right? So this pickguard would go here. And I'm going to draw this in with a pencil real quick. You're going to make this out of something else. And then in here you have the space to put your electronics. So I created this template, and you'll notice I left a little bit of the pickup right here, so you can use that as a guide to where you need to be. And you line that up with this hole, just like that. And now you can drill all this stuff out, and it will line up with this pickguard. You got these holes here will work, and it'll all line up nicey nice. Now, if you prefer, you can line it up this way too, which is the other reason why I leave all these interior pieces. You can see that just sort of fits right in there. Here's a pickguard that I've already assembled just to show you. So the idea is we're going to mount all of our electronics in here and then solder them up, and we'll wire our pickup and a ground wire from the bridge. We'll talk about all that in the wiring section. We'll wire those to here, and then we can just flip this over, drop it down, screw it on. All your electronics are all taken care of right there. Now the holes need to be deep enough to hold these pots and stuff, which these are not very deep at all. But this one here, once you stick the jack in, you have to remember that the tip of the jack needs to go past too. You're going to need about 1 inch of depth. And this is the only reason you have to make your bodies, in my opinion, the only reason you have to make your guitar bodies thicker than 1 inch is just for this. So you can see that's almost exactly 1 inch to the tip of that. So my block is 1.5 inches. I'm going to go maybe even like, I'm going to go over 1 inch deep, 1 1/8 inches, you know? Just to make sure I got plenty of room. And I'm going to do it for the whole thing, even though these don't need to be, because it's going to help remove weight, and it's also going to give me room to shove wires and stuff in there, because you're going to have a little extra wires and junk to get in the way. I forgot, when I made this template, I made these circles so you could just use a Forstner bit the same size and drill it out. So these are all, each of these are about 1.25 inches, a little less, like 1 1/8 inches, and then this one is about 7/8. So I'm just going to drill these out. We're going to go down a little lower. I drew another line here that represents my slightly over 1 inch depth that I want to do. Starting here with the 7/8 inch circle. And I'll talk about this circle when we get to the wiring part. It's a little bit of an oddity. So I don't have 1 1/4 inch Forstner bit readily available. I do have this 1 3/8 however. Check our depth. I'm just marking the outside edge. You see, that was much faster and easier than the router template for these simple things, but I still need to connect these all together. So I could grab a chisel and connect them like that. I think what I'll probably just do is drill them out real quick and then clean it up with a chisel. Because it just has to fit 2 skinny wires, that's all. Beautiful. I think I'm ready to cut my shape out now. I have all my pockets drilled and everything seems to be all lined up correctly. So I'm gonna cut this shape out on my bandsaw. I'm not gonna get carried away trying to make it perfect because I have that template I made and I have a router to do all that. So I'm just gonna hack away and get near the line, but not to the line, all the way around, and then make it pretty. Now we're starting to get something that looks like a guitar and it gets exciting. Since I left a pretty decent amount of this line, I can see my center mark still in the back, I can see my front lines here, and I can see where my template needs to go. Could do that two-sided tape thing again and line it all up and go do it on the router table. I'm going to assume you don't have a router table, so the other thing I can do is I can just use clamps and clamp it around the edge. And what I want is 3 clamps. You have to set up a sort of space where this will work for you. You have 3 clamps on this. There's always 2 clamps connected. You can come in with your router and you can go around, and when you come to one clamp, you can move it without worrying about your template moving because there's still 2 other clamps there. Come around here, and you can move it back. Come around here, you can move this one. And there's always 2 clamps on there, so it's not going to pivot on one of them, right? Makes sense? I can use this same little router bit that I just used to do the pockets, but for doing this outside, I have a little bit more wood to move, so I'm going to use one of those bigger ones that I showed you earlier. This bigger one, so we can kind of get a little more aggressive and take a little bit more material away while we're doing it. It's also not a bad idea to put just a little bit of oil on the bearing. Just because it is moving around. You see there's quite a bit of router bit sticking out there, cutting a lot of wood at once. So I'm going very slow and easy, and I'm bringing it up as high as I can to safely control it. I can drop a couple 4x4s on my bench, and that gives me a little extra height for sneaking some clamps in. I need to be extra wary of this spot right here, so that's a reminder to treat that a little differently. Got 3 clamps on, and I can get a couple good passes before I need to stop and adjust clamps. Now, while I have the router off, I can move 1 clamp at a time, so nothing slides. And now I have gotten all the way around once, and I could take the template off and just do the whole thing without the template, but it would get a little bit tricky here because of this gap for the neck pocket. So I'm going to leave the template on and bring the router bit down a little bit lower and get a little bit more before I resort to taking the template off and finishing it. I got as deep as I could with that router bit with the template on, so I took the template off, and now all is well and good, and I can just run the router bearing around this edge to cut this wood off, right? And then the rest of it will all match this, and everything will be great, we'll be done. But I have to be careful here because there's no top edge for that router bearing to rest against up here. So if I were to come around and do that here, I would end up cutting in and just screwing up this whole pocket. It would just start cutting in. And so I have to come up here and stop on the edge, and then start again here and go around and figure out some other way to remove this material. Alternatively, there are other types of pattern router bits, like this one, for example, where the bearing is on the top instead of the bottom, like the one we've been using. So I could switch to this router bit, flip the whole instrument upside down, set my bearing depth to where I have wood there, and then go around and do one clean pass. I run it across like this, and I want to make sure that I got enough depth to cut the rest of the wood off that I need to cut, but also that my bearing is going to touch this part here. There we have it. All right, that looks pretty nice, right? I want to add three-dimensional shape to this bass. So a typical thing that happens on guitars is in here there's some material removed, which is called a belly cut, and then often there's a little bit of material removed here for your arm. So it's like an arm cut and a belly cut. And then of course you can get all carried away with shaping this however you want. There's several ways I could do this. I could do it with hand planes, I could do it with rasps, I could do it with just palm sanders or belt sanders, but I am going to use my Arbortech Turbo Plane because it's a very quick way to remove a lot of material and then move to sanding. I love this turbo plane. I love angle grinders and I love power carving. I don't get to do it a lot, but I enjoy it. The one thing you do have to be aware of when you're using this is this does remove a lot of wood very quickly, so you want to be very, very gingerly with your passes. I don't want to go too far in and run the risk of getting in the way of my bridge, so I'm just going to give myself a little pencil line, just sort of visual. Do you see how fast this removes the material? I just removed the rough amount. I can go in and finish shaping this. I can either use, some coarse grit sandpaper on my palm sander. I can use my belt sander. I'm going to use a little bit of my benchtop sander first to just sort of rough it up a little bit, and then just skip right to this palm sander. The other thing you can do is use a roundover bit in your router. On all these edges, which you should probably do before you do this stuff, but it doesn't really matter. I can see a couple spots around here that I want to sand out and round over. So now I'm just going to get at it with some 60 grit. I still have a ton of finish sanding to do, but before I do that, I have a couple little voids I see in the wood that I want to cover here, and I also have just a couple more holes to drill that I might as well do now before I do my final sanding. Make sure everything's lined up, and now I'm going to mark my bridge again. I need to run a wire that goes underneath this bridge into the electronics cavity, and it has to ground to the bridge so we don't get a buzz noise when we're playing. So generally what we do is we run it up underneath the plate and we kind of attach it to one of these screws to secure it or whatever. So I can see at my plate here, I don't know exactly where it's going to go yet. I'm pretty close, but I don't want to drill these holes just yet for the screws, just in case it moves a scotch when I do my final setup. So I'm marking where they are, and now what I want to do is drill a hole like at an angle that goes into this cavity. That's the reason why I added this extra little hole out in the middle of outer space to this thing, so we wouldn't have to drill quite as far to get to there, because what happens is we're drilling at a slight angle to get down, and if it's too far we end up going through the back of the instrument before we get to the cavity. So I need to go from this screw to here, but I'm going to drill my hole more like here, and then I'll just route a little, just kind of scratch away a little bit of wood to run the wire securely. So I want to get as close to that as possible. I'm going to start by drilling down a touch, and I have this extra long 1/8 inch drill bit, which is nice to have. It's pretty difficult to do with a regular one because you can kind of really force these angles. So there are of course other solutions, but this is probably the easiest, and they sell these right at the box store. So I drilled a little hole to get started, and now I can go in as flat of an angle as possible, which gives me more distance before I shoot it out the back. And there we go. We see it's popped out my hole where I need it. Now I can run my ground wire. I would, on some of my instruments, or on an instrument without this top route cavity, I might need to do the same thing here to connect a pickup, or here into the cavity. But on this one I don't, because I have that pickguard coming right up to the cavity, so I was able to just notch it and run the wires right there. I need to be able to connect my neck to this base, and this kit comes with these trim rings and these screws, which was what we will use to do that. Now, I could just go and pick where I want them to go here on the back, and drill them through and hope for the best, but there's always the chance that I'll screw up and miss the cavity. So the best way to do this is to start here at the top, pick where you want them, where you know they're going to be, where they're doing the job you want them to do. So I'm going to put them right around there. That looks pretty good. I want to spread them out as much as possible to get as much coverage as possible, but I also want them to make sense with each other.
Slightly magnetized. That's not helping me any. That looks pretty good. I like where those are, and so now I'm just going to use my awl and point.
On my drill press, I'll use a very small drill bit. This is like a 3/32 or something like that, to drill a pilot hole through this instrument so I can flip it around upside down and see where the hole is going to go. And then I will drill my actual size hole, which needs to fit these screws that come with the kit, right? So I use my guide here and I can see that these screws are 3/16 inches wide. So I want to make the hole 3/16 on the body, but then when I do them on the neck later, I'm going to want to do them a little smaller, of course, so the screw grabs. So the handheld drill is really easy to get crooked and not know it, because they make these drills horribly and there's no right angles on them. If they just made these things rectangular or square, you could see what you were doing, or actually set up a fence, but this is stupid. So I have a drill press, so this way I know I can drill straight holes. Now I know where I need to drill in the back. 3/16. All right, it's looking pretty good. Like I said, I have a couple little voids here. I'm going to fill in with some epoxy or something. And I'm going to have a sanding party and sand this thing all out. I think the body is ready to finish, but I'm going to finish the neck at the same time. And we do have one thing we need to do before we finish that, is create the headstock shape. Now, about the necks, you can measure them and get all the specific measurements, but basically it's a jazz-based style neck, which means it's a little bit skinnier at the nut than a P-based style neck. But it's a regular 34-inch scale, and it's solid maple. And like I said, I think I said earlier in the video, I had these custom made overseas to my specs, the headstock, everything, the materials the way I wanted it, and I'm really super pleased with the way they came out. What they do not have is finish, and they don't have this headstock shape. So let me show you this little thing I'm really proud of. This is your template for when you're going to make your pickguard, right? Right, but it's also a headstock template. If you line this top edge up with the straight edge here, like so, and then mark it, a little bit to take off there too. There's our headstock shape. You can cut this out in the bandsaw, the jigsaw, with a jeweler's saw, whatever you want. It's time to put some finish on this bad boy, and there's a lot of ways you could go with this. There's all sorts of great finishes available at hardware stores and locally. You can spray it, you can brush it, you could go no finish at all if you want. There's a lot of really nice penetrating finishes like Rubio Monocoat and these sort of oils that give you like a real natural finish. I really try to avoid the dangerous oils like the polyurethanes and stuff. I'm going to use Total Boat Halcyon, which is a water-based low VOC finish that I love. I use it on my guitars, almost all of them now. I usually spray it, but today I'm just going to brush it on. Now when I do the fingerboard, the whole neck is unfinished, so it's a good idea to put some kind of finish on here. You could do like a rub and oil thing in, you could do a lacquer of some sort. I'm going to use a brush in this Halcyon, and I'm just going to finish right over the entire neck, just like it is, right over the frets and everything, because I am going to clean up and polish these frets, and that will take any of the residue of the finish off of them when I get there. And then the body, same thing. Let's talk about frets, baby. let's talk about you and me. You will probably not really need to do anything with the frets on this neck. Some people like to play their guitar, they like to have a little bit of a relief, so there's a little bit of a bow in here or something. But before you do any of that, when you're setting it up, you want to get it perfectly flat. Now this neck hasn't experienced any tension yet. And you can see right out of the factory, it is just nice and flat and even. I've been looking down at. There are all sorts of specialty tools that you use for straightening and leveling and crowning and doing all that stuff to your frets. I don't think you'll need to do any of that. But what I do need to do is just polish them up a little bit because I did put finish right over them. So we're going to do that, and while I'm doing it, I'm going to talk a little bit about fretting so you can kind of get a basic idea of what it is, and show you a little, like I did in the guitar video, show you don't necessarily need all the fancy tools to get the job done. If I were to go through and level and crown all these frets, I would do exactly what I'm about to do right now, but I'm doing this just to polish them. I'm going to use masking tape and cover the entire fingerboard because I don't want to polish this metal and get that metal dust stuck in the grain and make it all sort of like ugly looking. And I just have regular old masking tape, and what I'm doing here is putting it right up close to the fret, just right to the edge of the fret, but leaving the fret exposed and covering the wood like that. Now you'll see what's happening here on this, on a bass, the frets are bigger than a guitar, so I'm actually using 2 pieces of tape right now per fret. But as I get further up the neck, the frets get smaller, right? And now you can see very soon I'm only going to need 1 piece of tape right here. And that's the magic fret. And now the tape is going to start overlapping the frets. I'm going to pick frets that I can butt the tape up against and then cover other frets to whatever mathematically works out best for the width of the tape. See how that fret's completely covered? So then I just go right to this one. But now as I get further up the neck and they get smaller, you'll see this tape is going to cover a couple frets. I'm just going to use a regular old X-Acto knife. I'm going to go right along the edge of the fret. Oops, I think I drifted off that one a little bit. Try and stay as close to the fret as I can. And just cut this tape away. Oh, that looks pretty good. The whole idea of playing a guitar is that you have these strings and you make them shorter and they go higher in pitch, so you're putting your finger down in front of the fret and you're making the string shorter, and that's it, right? But if any of these frets between here and the end are too high and the string's vibrating, it's going to touch them, it's going to buzz, or it's going to make the wrong note, you know. So these all have to be pretty precise. Like, this is the most precise type of stuff that I've ever done. So in order to do that, you want to make your neck nice and flat and level. There's all sorts of tensions on the strings, things move, and you need to, you know, it really is an art form that I am very far from being like even good at, in my opinion. Like, it's a real skill to set up a guitar. It takes me way too long to do it. But taking all those things into account, what's great about these kits is that, like, these are all factory machined out pretty good to begin with, so they should just be good. So if I were to need to level all these frets, here's some of the basic tools I would need. I would want a Sharpie, maybe 2 different color Sharpies. And what I do with these is I use them to mark all the frets, and then as I sand, I can see if they are leveling up by how much the magic marker disappears. There's these notched straight edges, and I'm going to mention my buddy Greg over at Skyscraper Guitars. He makes all these really great luthier tools. I use several of them. And so this is a notched straight edge, and so the idea of this is you can put it down top of, there we go. You can put it down on top of the neck like this, and you'll be able to see if there's a bow or a high spot anywhere in it under the frets. It's not on the frets, it's under. And you can also shift it over a little bit and put it on the frets and kind of judge height. So these notched straight edge rulers come in handy. you can very easily make your own out of a $1 aluminum ruler too. A regular straight edge for going on top of the frets. And this is a fret leveler kind of tool that you can use to check individual frets. It's a fret rocker is what it's called. And you can see that the basic idea is it has all these different length sides for different areas. So you can put this on, and if the frets in the middle is higher, it'll rock. Go here, the frets in the middle is higher, it'll rock, and as you get shorter, you can go to a shorter side, so you're not accidentally hitting 4 frets. This is a very, very handy tool to use. You're also going to need files. This is just a regular triangular shaped file, but what I've done is I've ground all of the grooves off of one side to make it smooth, and so that's the side that goes down against the neck, and I can use this to just sort of soften edges a little bit without worrying about the file scratching the neck. You also need like a fret crowning file. There's several different ways of buying these in different types, and this here is a file that you can use to go right over the frets to level them. And you'll also need, I forgot to grab it, some type of fret sanding leveler. Again, my buddy Greg over Skyscraper Guitars makes these. I actually modified these. I cut this slot in it so I could put it on with strings on the guitar, because sometimes I find myself making quick adjustments where I want to leave the strings on. But so these blocks are perfectly machined and flat, and so I can use them to level out and sand over all of these frets. But it's already done. You don't have to. All we need to do right now is clean them up because we got some finish on them. So here's a little thing I use. This is actually a roll of plastic bags. It's wrapped up with tape. I like this because it's soft. There are things like these Klingspor products that are like kind of spongy pads, and you know, and other ways of doing this. You can just use your finger, but I find this little bag works well because it contours and crushes over the fret a little bit. So frets are not flat, they're sort of rounded, and if I put sandpaper on this and go like this, I can sort of squeeze and contour and shape it around all the different frets, and it works pretty well. It's a trick I learned from my buddy Crash that taught me a little bit about doing guitar setups. This is his roll of, they're actually dog waste bags. And then you'll need, of course, a ton of sandpaper. If you're doing this from scratch, you're going to want to be somewhere around, you know, like the 300 to 400 grit to start, all the way up to, like, I usually go to about 2,000. But right now we're just cleaning off finish, so I'm going to just do 1,200, and then I'm going to jump right to 2,000 because those are just the two that I happen to grab. And I'm just going to very quickly clean all these frets up. So I wrap this sandpaper around my little bag, give it a little pinch, and just polish them up. So this is like the final step of the final couple steps of doing a fret job. After you've done all your filing, all you're making the edges nice and soft, all the leveling, all the crowning, get them all the nice shape, then you want to polish them all up, make them nice and smooth so the strings can slide on them. This is why we taped it, because I'd be grinding all this gray metal dust into the fingerboard if I didn't tape it off. Close enough for rock and roll. Switch to the 2000. That looks pretty good, but we want to make them even better. These are fingernail buffers that they use at like nail parlors and stuff. There's a side that's a little bit coarser and a side that's a little bit softer. So this is designed to buff your fingernail and polish it. Let's see. Well, actually, maybe we'll polish this fingernail right here. This one. So watch, you can see. Hit it with the rough side a little bit, and then you can see the shine on it compared to my other fingernails. We're going to do that to all the frets. Okay, rough side first. Just went back and forth 10 times, and then the smooth side. See the difference? Real easy. Looking good. Now I'm ready to peel the tape off, but before I do anything, I'm going to wash my hands real good, because otherwise all this gray stuff I've been trying to keep off the neck is going to get on it from my hands. And now that my hands are clean, I can pull off the tape and inspect my beautiful fingerboard. There's a few little spots here that my finish isn't the best because of the way I brushed it on, but it'll all wear in as I play it. I'm happy with that.
There's only one thing left to make, and that is our pickguard. So I'm going to use my pickguard template and cut one out of, I happen to have this piece of 1/8 inch thick, kind of a gold color acrylic that I got in a bunch of drops from a local sign shop. It doesn't have to be acrylic, it could be plastic, you could buy pickguard material, you could make it out of wood, just about anything you want, holocore doors. The one thing you have to be aware of is whatever you make it out of, it has to be something that's strong enough to handle having the electronics run through it, and this jack getting plugged in and out of it 100 times or 1,000,000 times or whatever as you use the instrument. So if you make it out of wood or like a vinyl record, which I use a lot, it's probably not going to be strong enough to handle that jack. You could cut it out of a vinyl record and maybe glue it onto a substrate. This plexiglass works really well. It's 1/8 inch thick plexiglass, or they do make like pickguard materials, which are laminated layers that are a little bit stronger with a little less thickness. But you know, I don't want to buy anything. I want to use what I have laying around. I think a holocore door would probably hold up. And I did try to design the screws and the cavities, so there's a lot of screw holes around these parts, so they are securely fastened very closely to where the action is. It won't be like a big stretch of material pulling up from the screws. But yeah, just something to be aware of. And I'm going to use the one straight edge that I have to line up on the straight edge of the pickguard. Those holes are just for reference later. Now I'll cut this out of the bandsaw. I'll use my template to mark where I'm going to put all these screw holes for a template. To make sure I line them all up perfectly by just dropping a couple screws in there. There we go, now it's not sliding. So I'll have just through and I can see it fits through a 17/64, but it's very tight. So I usually go like just a little bit bigger at 9/32. The 1/4 inch jack. I usually just do the 23/64. You could do 3/8 if you don't have it though. When we're doing the electronics on this instrument, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, you want to do what's called shielding them. You need to ground them to the strings and shield them, and all this is to prevent noise and interference from other things. So they make shielding paints that you can paint the whole cavity with. They make shielding tape, which is this copper like tape that is very expensive if you buy guitar shielding tape, but if you buy what's called slug tape that gardeners use, it is much less expensive and the same damn thing. 100% the same thing. But if you don't want to spend any money on that, you can also, it doesn't quite work as well, but you can just use good old-fashioned aluminum foil, which is what I'm going to do. And because my pickguard is semi-translucent, I'm going to see whatever I put there. So I'm going to cover the entire thing with aluminum foil, and it's going to kind of create a little bit of a look. I've done this before and it's kind of cool. Let that sit for a minute. Bit. Nice and smooth. Oh, it looks great. A little wasteful on my part. I feel bad about that. And there's our pickguard. Remember that these are different. There's a 250A and a 250B, and you want to use the B one for the tone and the A one for the volume. This pocket seemed a little loose for my neck, and even after the finish, it did get it a little bit tighter, but it's still a little looser than I wanted. So I have gone and corrected the template, so the template you'll receive is a tighter fit. Won't be as loose. The reason you need it to be tight is, well, there's a lot of reasons, but the main one, in my opinion, is that, see how I can do this little turn? You can end up with your instrument being way out of alignment if there's too much wiggle room. And it's kind of got this keystone shape, so if it fits tight, it just pops in and it's perfectly straight. But now, because mine's a little loose, I have to make sure it's perfectly straight as I screw it together. Since my neck pocket is a little loose, I want to make sure I bolt this thing on straight, so it's going to take a little bit more work. And this is just not a bad thing to do anyways. Putting some tape down so I can make some pencil marks. My buddy over at SDM Custom hipped me to this idea. This is his invention, but what it is it's 2 yardsticks that are bolted together on this sort of adjustable piece. So what I can do is line up the 2 rulers with my nut. What this tool does is it follows the shape of the neck because it's skinnier here than it is here.
And I have markings on it too for measurement so I can see where everything's going to go. To see if I have the neck going in straight to my pickup, so not swaying like that. And it should be pretty easy to just sort of line it up like that and see if those are in fact centered over the pickup. 2 inches about, and over here a little more than that. It's more like 0.26 inches, so I might want to just angle it like this a little. That's about where I'm going to want my neck to be. Now very carefully make sure the neck doesn't move. Lift it up. Use my awl and poke a hole in just one of these. 5/32. Again, if you have a nice tight neck pocket, you probably won't need to do all this. You should really avoid using power tools for screwing these in. So I got this screw in almost all the way. I'm going to use that as my pivot, and I'm just going to make sure my neck is straight. Start adding my other screws to it very carefully. And I can do this with the hand drill because I can use these pre-existing holes as guide blocks. Keep me nice and straight. Just one more screw in and take a look at it. Make sure we're still lined up good, because if we're not, I can back this screw out, try again with one of the other holes, get it nice and straight, and then I could go and fill this hole and re-drill. I think we'll go with that. Now that we've got them all in, I'll make them tight. Make all my marks. Now, if you don't want to take 2 rulers and make this jig out of it, you can do all this with just 1 yardstick. You just have to do each side individually. So what you would want to do is take your ruler, line it up at the nut, the very beginning of the nut, line it up down the one side of your neck. You draw some lines, and also mark 34 inches, because that's where the strings are going to cross over the bridge. 34 inches. We just went and lined up this neck, and I took a lot of time because my neck pocket was a little big, and I got it pretty close, but as you can see, I'm about 5/100ths of an inch off, which is really not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but on a guitar it is a decent amount of distance. But it is within my margin of error on this instrument, so it should all be just fine. And like I said, the template that you will get, I did make that pocket a little smaller. I adjusted it, I ran a test case, fit better. You'll have less issues for this lining up. But it's still a good idea to do all this planning, even if you don't have like this sort of hump to work through that I'm working through right now. So you can see down here, these 2 lines are an extension of my neck. So this is the shape that the neck is coming down. The strings are obviously going to be inside the neck as they come down, but they're going to follow this basic very minor angle down the neck. And then you also can see here where I drew my line where 34 inches is. That's where the strings need to stop to be tuned properly. So I take my bridge and I want to put it with, we have space to adjust these strings back and forth. Like, so if it's a little bit off, you can move it backwards or forwards to get that 34 inches in tune. I'm going to take my bridge and I'm going to line it up so not the furthest one isn't directly on the line, but then this one is pretty far back, isn't directly on the line, to give me room to move it backwards and forwards either way if I need to adjust. Usually you end up going backwards, that's what I tend to find, so I'm airing towards the front, like airing towards making it longer than it needs to be. And so using these lines, I can sort of make this perfectly centered between those 2 extension lines of my fingerboard. I can see there's a slight curve to the shape of the bridge, and I can see that my lines come right to the inside of each curve. So that should be exactly where I want my bridge to be, with the strings going down to have them centered down the neck. But I'm still not going to settle on that. I'm going to find the center hole. I'm going to mark it with my awl. But I'm going to put this instrument together and start stringing it up with only that 1 screw in, just to make sure everything is lined up the way I want, because if it's not, then I can do maybe a slight twist of the bridge either way, or I might end up just having to do a quick adjustment, and then I would only have 1 hole that would be off again. So it's really all about just taking your time and really planning this stuff out. The screws that come with the bridge are the same ones that came with the strap holders, and they are about 1/8 of an inch, so I need to make my hole smaller. 7/64 would be good on a hardwood, but I'm going to go 3/32 because I'm using this pretty soft wood. But before I put this bridge down, even only temporarily, I need to run that ground wire that we talked about earlier. In your kit, you will have 3 different colors of wire, maybe only 2, but there'd be larger amounts, but I generally put 3 in, and you can see on the pickup there's 2 colors of wire. There's of course the positive, and then there's the negative, the black. He uses the reclaimed wire I send him to make these pickups over at Gemini, so they won't always be black and yellow, but they'll always be like a dark color and a light color, and the dark color will always be the negative and the light color the positive. So I'm going to, in this kit, again I'm using all this reclaimed wire, I'm going to use green as my ground. I don't want to use too much because I need to save some for the rest of my build, but I'll take a little more than I need. I also want it to be long enough so I can lift the pick guard up while I'm working and soldering and stuff. So I'm going to put this 1 screw in. I'm also going to mount my pickup right now. Put the pickup in. I'm going to use the screw as an awl and just mark the wood where these screw holes need to be. See where I push the screw in. 3 seconds. Drill these holes out a little bit. Happens to be the drill bit that's still in there from the bridge. I run those 2 screws through the top. Put my little rubber sleeves on those screws. Find the holes. There we go. This is good. Not a lot of pressure. Let's run a couple strings down it and see if it looks like everything's going to line up all right. And we're not going to put this under tension yet, or not severe or serious full tension, because I only have this 1 screw holding this bridge on right now. I always like to wind it around at least once. You could cut them. There's some like tone snobs that say you should never cut bass strings and you should wind the whole thing around, and I kind of do that. But so I sort of got it started. I stick it in this hole down the center, and then I kind of bent it like that, and now I can turn it and start to put some tension on it. And it'll take a few turns for these windings to catch up. So you slide it through there, and then it goes up over this little T here. Wrap it around this a couple times if you can. We're going to add a string tensioner up here later, and then I can see it going nice down the center of the fingerboard. So I want to get all of that good, and I'm also going to just check my measurement real quick to make sure the string is about 34 inches long right there at the bridge. And when I'm satisfied, I'm going to run the rest of these screws in and put this together. Just to clarify some of this math, it starts right here. This is where the string stops contacting the nut, and that's where you start measuring from to get your 34 inches. And you can see if we're 34 inches, that means that the halfway mark, which is the octave mark, identified by these double dots, is 17 inches. So you can see right there, that's 17. And that's how we know that our scale is 34 inches. So if we had just gotten this neck in a void and we had no guitar and didn't know anything about it, you just measure to the 12th fret and then times that by 2, and that's your scale length. I'm right at 34 inches, so I'm pretty good. I like to have a lot of back pressure, so maybe I'll go a little bit more like around right by the second here. Right there. So I will. I know it's tough to see this with my hand in the way. So I think I'm going to put it right about there. I'm going to use my awl to mark it. My grooves are there. This is always my favorite part of every instrument build, is right now. I just put strings on it. This thing is nowhere near set up. It's barely in tune. It's not intonated. Nothing is right. The electronics are even set up. And I'm going to pluck it. And it's going to be horrible probably, but it doesn't matter. It's still my favorite part. It's actually not bad. Everything about the rest of this process takes time. It's kind of like how when you see like a you drive by a vacant lot, the next day you drive by and there's like a 3-story building framed out. You're like, oh my God, they made a whole 3-story building? But in actuality, it's another 4 months while they put the sheetrock up and the shingles and the windows and all that stuff. And that's what we have to do now. In order to make this a home, in order to make this a place that we can live, we have to take the time to set it up, get it playing right, and do the wiring and all that stuff. And the thing about setting it up is that we have all this force and all these tensions at play, especially in basses over guitars. There's so much tension from these strings pulling on this neck that when you make minor adjustments, sometimes it takes the instrument a few hours or even a day or two to adjust and react to the changes you made. So if you pick it up and you're playing it right now and it's horrible, don't panic yet. As long as the strings aren't totally touching the neck and they're all somewhat there, you're going to be able to make it play. But we're going to have to be patient. We're going to have to take our time. I'm just going to eyeball the center of this horn here. Drill a 3/32 hole. This little felt washer and the actual strap holder. So we run the screw through the strap holder and then we put this little felt washer on, just protects the finish. Drill the hole. And I'm actually, as I push down with my screwdriver, I'm pulling up with my right hand so I'm not jamming that headstock into the ground. All right, before I wire it, just because I have some of the tools sitting here on the bench, I'm going to start to set this instrument up a little bit. In your kit, a couple Allen keys. There's this little skinny one, which you can use on this bridge to make adjustments. And then there's this thicker one that you use to make truss rod adjustments on the neck all the way down here at the headstock. See the little hole right there? This goes in there to adjust the truss rod. There's a lot of tension pulling from the nut here to the bridge here. These strings are wound up tight so they'll produce a sound, and they want to close in on each other like this. So what will happen is it will sometimes make this neck sort of arch in and sort of bow in a little bit. And that's where that truss rod comes in. There's a steel rod that runs through the center of the neck. Kind of like this. It's probably a little different than this one. And you can turn it, the Allen key, and you can see what's happening here, the rod in the middle. See how it's pushing up? It's tightening this rod and it's pushing up to counterbalance the tension of the strings that are trying to make it curl down like that. So you can turn, in this case clockwise, to tighten that rod and combat some of that tension that's happening on the wood. How do you know if you need to do this? You can look down the neck and you can see it. If you close one eye and you look right down the neck, you'll see if it's flat here or if it's curling down or if it's going up, and you adjust accordingly. Now I can see a slight bow going in a little bit of a relief, they would call that in the biz. Some people like that. I like to make the neck as flat as possible. So I'm going to stick my Allen key in here. Sometimes you have to take the strings off to do this. I'm going to turn it to the right a little bit to try and tighten that truss rod and see if I can make that a little bit flatter. And all I'm doing is I'm finding the hole that's in there, lining up the Allen key to it, and then pushing it to the right and then pulling it out. And of course there's all this stuff in the way, so I can't make these big dramatic turns. I have to just do little turns. Oh, it looks pretty good. It looks dead straight. The curve that was in the middle is gone. It might actually even be aimed up a little bit in the middle right now, so that means the truss rods are working good. It's tough to see this on film. Now that I have the truss rod set up where I want it, I want to bring my string action down to about where I want it. I have this little ruler. It's just a 30 seconds ruler I picked up for a couple bucks at the box store that I like to use for this. It's real easy to see. And what I'm going to do is put it on the fret and measure how high the strings are off the fret. And I'll show you a camera angle of this in a minute. So right now, this is like 4 or 5 30-seconds off, which is like way too high for me. Then I can see down here where the nut is, like it's only about 1 or 2 30-seconds off the top, which is where I want it to be. Me personally, the way I like them set up, I want it to be pretty much that height the entire way. Some people like them to get a little higher. Some people like to have that relief in the middle, like I mentioned. But so my goal is to get all these strings to be about 1 to 2 30-seconds of an inch off the frets. How do we do that? We do that by adjusting the height of the bridge here, and sometimes we might have to make some nut adjustments too to bring it down or up. Use that little skinny Allen key that came with this to lefty-loosey lower the bridge. I'm just bringing them all down right now because I'd rather bring them back up from too low. I'm way out of tune, of course, but I can check my measurements. Oh, look at that. I'm at like, I pretty much nailed it right where I want to be. I'm at 2/32. Let's see if I can show you. I'm at about like 1 to 2/32 everywhere right now, so it might be a little low. Here in the middle, where the neck arches up, I'm actually like probably a little too low. I'm only about 1/32. Here I have some buzzes. I'm a little bit too low, so the string is hitting the buzz. Let's just take this one string. I'm just going to play those same couple notes again. I'm just going to raise this up a couple turns. The buzzes are almost all gone. There's always a little bit of string noise, but... All right, let's say we've gotten to this point and your bass sounds maybe like this. Like all the strings are touching all the frets, and this is all the way up or all the way down. Like you can't make any adjustment here to get this to play. What's going on? Well, there could be a couple things going on, and they're all pretty easy to fix, so don't worry. Suppose you have this bridge extended as high as it goes without losing any of the little parts, and the strings are still flat on the fingerboard. What that means simply is your neck is too high. It just means that the pocket in the body is not deep enough. So you need to remove the neck, and then you can just use that pattern router bit and just go right into that pocket. You don't even need the template anymore now. You just gotta be careful around the edge and lower that pocket a little bit. You're gonna really wanna work in hundredths of an inch at this point when you're doing these types of changes, because a little goes a long way on an instrument. So maybe, you know, it's sticking out too high, bring that pocket down. Let's take a quick measurement on mine. Right now at the last fret, my neck sticks out 0.42 inches from the body, and I have plenty of room in the bridge either way. 0.4 on the other side, and I had made this neck pocket 0.65 inches, as we remember from earlier. So that seems like a pretty good place to start. I got lots of room in the bridge to adjust. So suppose things are still not working right. Maybe you made the pocket too deep and your neck is too low, and you have this bridge all the way down and the strings are still too high. What are you gonna do? Then you could shim it. You see, the way this instrument's designed, the neck is going into the body perfectly flat, and so everything about this is flat. But some guitars, the neck goes in at an angle, like this, and then that makes the strings go up. Here, you know what? I can show you one. Now, there are lots of reasons and theories and stuff like that, but now you can see on this guitar here, this is what's called an archtop guitar. See how the neck goes in at an angle and the strings actually come up, and then this bridge, here's why it's called a bridge, actually bends the strings over, and it's just sort of a different math and geometric setup. The whole thing's got angles. It gets more complicated doing that, and it's not always necessary. So we're making flat instruments right now. However, if you, like I said, your neck pocket's too deep maybe, or whatever, and you have your neck in here and this bridge is lowered all the way and you still can't get it to work, what you can do is you can add a shim to your neck pocket, and that will make your guitar go from this to this and have a slight angle to it, which will mean you can then raise the bridge up. And again, everything about this goes like a little bit, just goes such a long way. So like for example, my business card is 0.295 inches thick because I make them out of cereal boxes. This is too thick. I would use a regular business card, rip maybe that much off of it or cut it, and take the strings off, unbolt my neck, and stick that in the neck pocket right about here, right at the front. So, you know, under the neck, of course, and then screws that again. So now it's going to force the neck down, but just at a slight angle up. And just that difference, just that 0.02 inches difference will change the geometry of your guitar dramatically, and you're going to get a different result. So start with that. Rip a business card off, shim it in there, get an angle, see if that works. If that doesn't work, take it apart again. We're almost ready to do wiring, but one more thing I wanted to talk about with setup is how high the pickup is from the strings. Like, you want to be able to play and touch the string and pluck the string and have it not touch the pickup ever. But you also want it to be pretty close to the strings, because the closer it is to the strings, the less interference and the louder it is and this and that. So I feel like I put this pickup in a little bit low. I think I can get closer to the strings, so I'm just backing these screws out a little bit. It's looking pretty good. Sometimes you gotta encourage it. That looks good. So now I can see if I push down the very last string, I have about 3 or 4 30-seconds of space between the string and the pickup, so that gives it room to vibrate. If you don't own a soldering iron, you're going to need one. I have a better one, but I'm going to use this one. I'm going to show you what it is. This is a wood burning kit that you can get at craft stores. They're about 20 bucks. And what's cool about this is the tips are interchangeable. There's a couple different types that can screw in and out. So you can have all sorts of cool shapes, and there's like a hot knife for cutting, little patterns and shapes and stuff. So you can buy this and have more than just a soldering iron. I'm going to hold the pot with one hand and use the socket in the other hand and just tighten it. And the reason I'm doing it without the wrench is it won't fit over the stem. You know, these socket wrenches will bottom out. You could also use like a regular crescent wrench or something, but I always find that I get enough torque by just doing this, and it's a little neater and cleaner. In your wiring kit, besides the parts that we already put on this board, we're going to find some wire, some solder. These are just the knobs that we'll put on when we're done. The screws to hold the pick guard down. You'll also find over at the website where you can download the information where you got this video, some wiring schematics that you can look at. And there'll also be a capacitor in there. Now, this is actually really easy, but it's a little bit intimidating if you're not used to wiring. The basic idea is the signal comes through the positive of the pickup into the volume, and then it runs from the volume knob to the tone knob, where it runs through the capacitor if you turn the tone knob, and then it runs from the volume knob to the jack. So whatever's happening on the tone knob doesn't matter, it will still signal through the jack and the volume cuts it off. That's all there is to it. And then there's a wire that grounds this whole circuit out. That's really all there is to it. So we're going to go ahead and wire this up real quick. The first thing I want to do is I want to get a little piece of sandpaper, and I want to sand these tops of these potentiometers to get the grease off of them, because I will be using those as grounds. For positive wire, I need to cut a short one, because the pickup's going to go to the volume, and then I need to cut a long one to go from the volume to the jack, and a short one to go from the volume to the tone. And then for ground wire, I need to cut ground wire to connect everything. So it's really not a lot of wire. You should have plenty of wire here. Besides the soldering iron, you will need the solder that's in the kit. I gave you what should be plenty. And you know, the wire strippers we've always been using. Another tool that comes in handy is just a little piece of metal to just kind of help you hold stuff down. There's my volume, there's my tone. Before I do anything, I'm going to do what's called tinning, and I'm going to heat up some of these ends and get some solder on them. I don't use all of the tabs on the pots, but on the tone one I'm going to use the middle one and the first one, which is the one on the bottom right now. So get a little bit of... That's the look I was going for, of trying to cover the hole over with solder a little bit. This one's going to connect to the ground circuit, so instead of running a wire to it, I'm going to very carefully bend it up and touch it to the top of the pots and just sort of ground it onto itself. Just like that. And then of course I'm going to need to solder it in place. This is where this little stick tool comes in handy, because now what I can do is I can hold this wire down with my soldering iron, really let that heat up for a minute. Solder that right to the pot. Didn't quite get the tab in there yet. There we go. And then use this tool to hold it in place so I can pull the heat away and give it a chance to cool and harden as one unit. There we go. Nice. The capacitor is going to connect from the ground to the center post of the tone knob, or just move it around a little bit. That looks better. Let it cool. There we go. And then I'm going to bend this around and ground it right up here into the same spot that I already started. How do you know which side of the 1/4" jack is ground? I can see just by looking down on this, I can see this tab right here touching the sleeve, and this one I can see touching nothing, but I know this one's touching the sleeve, so I know that's my ground. Also, it's usually the one that's a little bit smaller. You can see that it's a little bit smaller. So, the smaller one is the ground. Now that these are all grounded, all I have to do is add my ground wire for my bridge and my ground wire for my pickups to these circuits, but I'm gonna do the positive stuff that I need to do here first. So I have my red wire that I cut that's short, and I'm going to connect these two together. Excellent. And then I have to send from the middle to the output jack. So we have our ground wires need to connect to the ground circuit, and this yellow wire needs to connect to the beginning of the power, or the volume, and that's it. I want to be careful not to scratch anything. That's it. Tuck the wires into the holes, and you can see why I made the holes a little bit oversized, so we have room to put all these wires. Oh, there it is. It's the wire going to the tone knob, the tone side that was grounding out. 3/32 drill bit again. Our electronics done. We're out of tune, and we have our setup pretty close. We need to intonate it. So I have this free guitar tuner app on my phone I'm going to use to intonate this instrument, and I'll explain to you what that means. Remember we were talking about that 34-inch string scale thingy? Well, if the string is too short, it might be a little bit too high pitched on some of these frets, and if it's too long, it might be a little bit too low pitched on some of these frets. So we might need to make some minor adjustments down here to get these all to be exactly the right length that they need to be. So first we're going to tune the whole instrument. These strings are still new, so I was able to sort of stretch it out. We're close enough to in tune where everything's in balance, and normally I would use a much fancier tuner to do this, but you might not have one, but you probably have a smartphone and these apps are free. So we'll start with the G string. It's in tune, and then what I'm going to do is call the harmonic, which is right here at this 12th fret. I'm not going to play the note. I'm going to put my finger just above the fret and play that sort of harmonic sound and get that in tune as well. So that looks like it's in tune good, same as the open string. Now I'm going to push down on the 12th fret and see if it's the same note. I got a little bit of buzz, so I might have to bring my bridge up a tiny bit. So I got my string, my G's tuned, the harmonics tuned. Now I play the note, and if it's the same note, looks like it's a little bit sharp. We'll talk about that buzz later too. But since it's a little sharp, that means what I need to do is I need to make my string longer by bringing this bridge piece back by turning the screw tighter. Much, much better. Just a little bit higher. Perfect. That one's got to go back just a little bit. It's pretty close. Great. Like I mentioned at the top, I designed this body for the kit, but I am going to add this body style to my lineup because I like it. And I also mentioned at the top that I got this piece of wood from my friend and podcast partner, William Lutz. And so since this is a new model that I haven't named yet, I think it's only fitting to name it after him. But don't tell him, it'll go to his head. That's all I'm gonna do for today. I'm gonna let it sit overnight. I hear some buzzes. There's some things I need to change and fix, but I'm not gonna do it now. I'm gonna let it be an instrument for at least 12 hours before I start tinkering with it anymore. It has been 2 full days since I put this bass together and started playing it. I can't stress the patience enough of taking your time at this point in the game to let the instrument settle and sort of, you know, become an instrument before you just start making adjustments. So 2 days later, I've let this sit, and now I'm going to play every note and listen for buzzes. I know that there's a trouble spot up here that I've already heard, but I'm just going to kind of do it again. I'm plugged into an amp over there, and this is actually a good warm-up for just playing bass too. What I do is I just play 1 finger per fret all the way up the neck. When I'm doing this as a warm-up, or back in the day when I used to actually do types of things like this for a warm-up, I would do it fast, backwards, slow, just to practice different techniques. But right now we're just listening for buzzes, so we're just going to go nice and slow. Starting to hear a buzz right there. Hear that? Hear that? Is that buzz again? I'm doubling over a fret here. So our buzz is around here. And we can hear, by the time we get here, it's gone. So that means it's probably this fret, maybe it's this one. Let's find out. Remember I talked about that fret rocker? Now you see how it has these 4 different lengths. That's because the frets are further apart down this end than they are up here. So you need the shorter one up on this side to put it on 3 frets, whereas the further down you get, the longer side you need. So what I want to do with this fret rocker is put it on top of 3 frets and see if it rocks. If it's flat, that means that the middle one is even with the side, or one of the sides, and then as I move up and it rocks, that means that the middle one is higher than the 2 ends, and so you have to keep going to figure out which one it is. And I can feel, you can only be on 3 or it won't work. I can feel it right here. See how this has just got a little bit of a wiggle? But here, it's just a little bit of a wiggle. A little bit. So this fret is higher. If I go here, it doesn't wiggle. And if I go here, it doesn't wiggle. So it's just this fret. I'm going to mark that real quick with a Sharpie. Right there, so I remember which one it is. Now I can go up and down the whole fingerboard and look for other ones. You would want to make sure your neck is kind of level, but we're playing it and it all feels good, so I'm going to leave well enough alone, but I want to bring this 1 fret down. Suppose you don't have a fret rocker and you want to find this. What you need is a straight edge that is short enough to fit on only 3 frets. So like if you have one of my squares, this one will actually get a lot of frets. You can get, it's a little long to use this side down here. You can maybe get these first 3 frets if you take the nut out and check those with that side. But then with this side, you can check 2, 3, 4, 5. I got, right here is my last one where I can use, so I can check all the way up to this fret, and then I can switch to this side here, check 1, 2, 3, This might have a little bit of a rock in it, but like I said, I'm not going to mess with it because I'm not hearing any buzzes. So now, here's my high one. I'm finding it. See, I've got it. It's confirmed with the square. Now, how far up can I go here? So with the square, I can get up to about this fret. So again, I sell these at newperspectivesmusic.com and at timsway.net/square. It's not designed to be a guitar tool, but it is a handy tool, and it has a bazillion other features, as you can see. But so I can only get this far up with it because it's not a fret rocker. Like a real fret rocker has this smaller side. You can buy one of these too. If you are going to buy one, I recommend going to Skyscraper Guitars because that's my buddy Greg, and he makes nice stuff, and he's a good guy. But if you don't want to spend the money on this, and you have done all you can with this, your square or whatever other types of squares you may have laying around, and you get to that point, well, look at that right here. I can't quite get this fret or this fret, but I can get these last couple ones with this here. So there's an option for a straight edge. But what I also discovered I can use is one of these razor blades, and that'll get me sort of bridge that gap between where this is too long and this is too short. So here I can feel that rock with the razor blade right here. There are all sorts of tools like these fret crowning files and stuff. These work pretty well, but again, they're expensive. If you don't have one, we don't necessarily need one. We just need to bring a little bit of this fret down. I have just this regular old bastard file that is pretty small, pretty flat. If you don't have one of these, you might have, you know, some other type of file. I'm just going to use this thing, and I'm going to just kiss the top of it a little bit. You can see I put a little bit of magic marker on there so I can see it. I'm going to wear the magic marker away, put some tape around it. I'm not even going to take the strings off. Hold the strings up a little bit for me right there. So. Now I just want to knock this fret down a little bit. I'm going to try and keep the shape by kind of going back and forth. Again, like real luthiers out there would probably cringe about the way I'm going to finish this and do this all, but I'm assuming you're not a real luthier and you don't have all these tools and you're not going to go buy them all to just make one guitar. It would make making this guitar no longer less expensive than buying a new one if you had to buy all the specialty tools, so let's find a way around them. Now, unfortunately, I have to take the tape off to make sure the rock is gone. Let's try a razor blade. Still a teeny, teeny, tiny bit. There wasn't really any over here already. Just go a little tiny bit more. This is a very fine file, but still, it can get away from you real fast. You don't want to take too much off because then you'll end up having to level all the other ones around it. Oh, I think we got it. No more rock. So a tiny bit of rock right there. Beautiful. So now with that taken care of, I'm going to put this tape back. I think I might put a little more. Now, this is going to be too rough because I was just filing it. So if you were to play on that and like bend the string a little bit, it's going to sound horrible, it's going to feel horrible. So we need to polish that up again. I'm just going to go right into my little bin of sandpaper here and start with probably about 400 or so. And I'm just going to use my finger because my finger is going to contour right around that fret and kind of get all the sides. Of course, the proper way to do it is take all the strings off, but I think I can just do this real quick like this, and I think it's going to be fine. So now we'll go to, that's 800, let me find a 400. 800. 1,000. Here's a 2,000. just to kind of clean it off. Just to wipe that all off. And now look, we got this nice shine on this fret. You can see how shiny it is? It actually makes all the other ones look pretty dull now. But we had talked about how to sand them before. If you wanted to go through and make them all match, you could. This will just sort of blend in time. Let's see if we got rid of that buzz. Still tiny bit of buzz. I think it's this fret here might be a little bit higher now because we brought that one down. Feels like the buzz might have just moved up, and that can happen because if you lower this, you might end up having this whole pitch go down. But like I said about patience, I'm not going to do anything right now. I'm going to let it sit overnight and see if it's still there in the morning. Or if it still bothers me. Did you do it? Is your bass done? Please share pictures with me. Tag me in all your posts. I want to see it. I want to see these kits out in the wild. Did you have any problems or have any questions or anything that came up that I didn't answer in that video? Drop me an email at tim@newperspectivemusic.com and I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have. I'm trying to make this something that is fun, easy, and successful for everyone. Okay, thank you very much for your support. I hope you had a blast doing this, and it's addictive, right? I'm pretty sure this isn't going to be your last instrument. But now you're armed with a little bit of knowledge and the basic understanding of what you need, where to start, so you can go forward out in the world of making guitars with or without my kit. And that's the ultimate goal. Go make the music you want to make. Go make the instrument you want to play it with. Be good.